Hoe zal er gehandeld moeten worden bij een eventuele radiologische en chemische incident in Suriname? Welke zaken zijn er allemaal in place? Wat zal er dus ook nog allemaal in place moeten komen? Welke actoren dienen op te treden? Dat zijn allemaal zaken die op deze woensdag duidelijk is gekomen tijdens een workshop welke georganiseerd is geworden door de PAHO. TBN, Prime Alert, die was er ook aanwezig. En we spraken er met Iana Wellington Perkins. Zij is de advisor Health Emergency PAHO WHO Office in Suriname. What is the main purpose of this workshop?
The main purpose of this workshop is to bring together stakeholders from different industries, different ministries, different entities that have a stake in preparing, making sure that Suriname is as prepared as possible for emergencies resulting from chemical hazards and radiation hazards. And this is especially important given the developments that are happening, for example, in oil and gas, and the developments that we expect over the next few years. So PAHO is supporting the Ministry of Health to prepare the health sector, especially for responding to any emergencies in these areas.
So the importance of this is?
The importance of this is to ensure that the population is as safe as possible. So put systems in place so that everybody is aware of the risks that exist, and as best as possible we mitigate or lessen those risks.
And you're talking about systems like?
Systems like surveillance systems, so monitoring the air, the environment, the soil, water, and also the population, the human population, making sure that if there is anything that looks suspicious, that it may be related to a chemical incident or radiation incident, then that is picked up early and we can act on it. All the entities are aware of their role, so we can act on it. There's also the systems in place that deal with the health sector's response to an emergency or an event. So making sure that specifically within the health sector, the different clinical and non-clinical entities are aware of exactly how to proceed. So having standard operating procedures for how to proceed. And then on the other side of things, also having standard operating procedures regarding how to prevent, if you will, or mitigate the risk. So making sure that there are rules in place for how different hazards are handled, different chemicals are handled, radiation sources are handled, etc. So putting all of that together so that there are systems at each stage for prevention as well as for response.
Yeah. Is it new for Suriname?
Not completely. So one of the things that we're doing in this workshop is having a look at what currently exists, because there are systems in place. It's not that there is nothing. There are systems in place, so it's a matter of putting everything together, bringing together the people who are involved, because some persons may not be fully aware of what other sectors are doing. So it's pulling everything together so that in the event that something happens, the response can be coordinated. We're ready for a coordinated response.
Which stakeholders has it already in place?
So there are some stakeholders in industry especially that have things in place. The health sector has things in place. The airports have things in place. The maritime authorities have things in place. The NCCR, as you know, has systems in place for coordinating a national response to a disaster. The added value of this workshop is to bring everybody together so that everybody is aware of what their roles are, and if there are gaps in the response or in the preparedness, then we can find those gaps and take initiatives to fill them.
What are the roles of the participants today?
The participants will bring to the table their knowledge and their experience, and when they are discussing different scenarios, different potential scenarios, So discussing those scenarios with the knowledge that they have, including documents that they are aware of, standard operating procedures, it will allow them to bring out any gaps that exist. And this is very important in the context of the international health regulations. Suriname is a member of Suriname has signed on to the international health regulations. And what this requires is that Suriname has capacities in place to prepare for, to prevent, to prepare for, and to respond to hazards. And chemical and radiation hazards are specific hazards that are named in the international health regulations. And there are standards that the country needs to be up to in order to fulfill the requirements under the international health regulations.
What about laws about this?
So there is legislation that exists. We reviewed some of those today. I do not have the names of all of them now, but we reviewed the legislation. Even in that discussion of legislation, we realize that there are gaps. So there's always room for improvement. And one of the things that PAHO is doing is supporting the country to identify where there are gaps, because you need to do this to prepare. You can't do it in an event. It's done in advance so that we can be as prepared as possible.
Would you give an example of one of those gaps?
One of the gaps, because remember, we're in the process of identifying the gaps right now. One of the gaps that has come out is something I mentioned before, that entities may not be fully aware of the role of other entities. So for example, there was a question this morning regarding the role of the Labor Inspectorate in assessing dangerous goods that may have come into a port, whether an airport or a seaport. So there had existed something in the past. There was a question regarding current standard operating procedures and policies, whether those exist still. Are they being implemented? So those are some of the things that will be answered today.
Now the groups are invited. The groups are divided in the stakeholders. Sorry, the stakeholders are divided in groups.
Yes.
I think they will have presentations.
Yes.
What will happen with those presentations?
So the consultants that we have engaged, the PAHO has engaged, will take all of that information and put it together into a plan. So the gaps will have been identified, and most likely persons will have recommendations. There will be best practices that are identified. All of that will be put into a plan for the health sector's response to chemical emergencies, and a plan for the health sector's response to radiation emergencies. Once the plan has been drafted, then it will be brought back to the stakeholders to say, okay, this is what we discussed. Are you in agreement with what we have put together? And then the other phase, once the plan is finalized, is implementation, because as we just discussed, preparation is about putting things in place. There are actions that need to be taken prior to an event. So the plan will be implemented and tested, because it's important that it's tested and revised, updated as necessary. So multiple stakeholders will be brought together at different times to make sure that things are still relevant and they're as accurate as possible.
And what is important in the presentation?
It's important that persons are as open as possible, that persons think about scenarios that they may not have thought about before.
Out of the box.
Out of the box thinking, yes, things that probably are, we want persons to be stimulated to think of possibilities that may not have been an issue before, but in the future, given the developments that are expected and given what has happened in other contexts, may be an issue for Suriname in the coming years. So we want those considerations to come out now as much as possible, so we can prepare as best as possible, because we cannot predict the future.
And has PAHO done this also in other countries?
So PAHO has been supporting preparedness activities under the IHR for chemical and radiation emergencies, as well as for other things. So, for example, for infectious disease hazards like pandemics and other outbreaks, we have been doing this in countries across the region, across the Americas. Yes.
So, and how is it working?
So, what has happened is that while I cannot give PAHO all the credit, there are countries within the region who have SOPs, strong SOPs, and who have had to test those SOPs. Of course, there will be gaps because every time there's an incident or an event.
An SOP?
Sorry, a standard operating procedure. So it's how exactly who will do what when an event occurs. So countries have strong SOPs. So for example, there were incidents, radiation incidents. There have been radiation incidents in Mexico and other countries. There have been, for example, chemical spills that persons will have been aware of. They would have been published in the media, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago. When these events happen, there are clear procedures for responding, and because of this policy that we have of you create a standard operating procedure. When an event happens, you test it. It's a real life test. Then you go back. We also support after action reviews and intra-action reviews, where you go back now to see what happened, what went well, what didn't go so well, what should we change for next time. So you learn from each experience. And these are all things that are done within the international health regulations. They're all things that are guided by the international health regulations.
There are guidelines, but also always open for changes.
Yes, so the guidelines that the countries develop are always, they should be open for changes, because they may lose relevance if you're not constantly checking to see if they're still relevant.
And it is, I think, a first time for Suriname?
Taking
that initiative from PAHO?
Specifically for these hazards? I believe in the past we may have started discussions around chemical hazards and radiation as well, hazards. But to the best of my knowledge, in recent times, this is the first time we're having this type of multi-stakeholder grouping to move toward developing the actual plans for the health sector's response.
And as for known, has Suriname had any radiation or chemical, how do you say it? Spill or problems?
So there have been issues with chemicals. I think my colleagues, the consultants, are better positioned to give you the details. However, there have been incidents, maybe not with radiation per se, but with chemicals. So the country has had to respond, and those are some of the things that we will be discussing today. How has the country responded in the past? Hopefully there are persons who would have had that experience, and they would be able to identify any gaps. So not just with the potential scenarios, but things that have happened in the past as well.
And with all the participants that have shown interest, PAHO is happy with the participation?
Very happy with the breadth of industries and entities and sectors that are represented.
They see the importance.
They apparently they do, and we're very happy with the turnout, and we look forward to continuing to work with the sectors, maybe not always in a big group like this, but with individual or smaller groups of sectors to work on specific standard operating procedures, which would be an addendum, if you will, or an annex to the plan. So there may be specific scenarios that we need to consider in detail who will do what. So we look forward to continuing to have that engagement with the different sectors.
So giving it a little bit a body, like how they would say it.
More detail. So so when you have a plan, it's usually, even if it's an operational plan, it still may be a large document. What we need to do is to have detailed sections or additional sections that go into more detail regarding step by step by step who does what, when is this action triggered, how long does this action last for, when do we escalate, who should be involved, when do we stand down, that sort of thing, for specific scenario types or specific incidents. So if you have a fire, a wildfire, or a fire at a chemical facility, then that would be a different set of SOPs from if you have, as has happened in some countries, a lost radiation source. The response would be different, so we'd have to go through the details in separate sessions.